And welcome to FISM News. I'm Renata Kiss. And on tonight's show, trust in Biden's economy dips. Meanwhile, the IDF officially begins their operation in Rafah as Israel and the U.S. honor the victims of the Holocaust. But before we get into our coverage, Samuel Case is taking some time off this week, so filling in for him is Ian Patrick once again. Welcome, Ian.
Thank you so much, Rennie. It's a pleasure to be here with you again, and I look forward to doing today and the rest of this week. But I got to say that Operation in Rafah sounds like a pretty big deal. I know we've been waiting on that for a long time, so I'm curious to hear what we have for that.
Absolutely. And speaking of that, we start in Israel, where the IDF is pushing forward with its operation in Rafah. According to Reuters, the IDF took control of the southern section of the Rafah crossing today, which has been a key passage for Palestinian aid. The Gaza Crossings Authority said in a statement that Israel's occupation is a death sentence against ill and injured Gaza residents. However, Hamas used the location to launch deadly rockets just over the weekend, prompting the IDF to respond. Residents said they received leaflets from the IDF about their planned operation. Now, the Israeli military said that most people and organizations left the eastern part of Gaza, where a limited operation ended up killing about 20 fighters and unearthed 3 tunnel shafts. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres warned that the assault would be a strategic mistake and called on the opposing forces to come to an agreement.
I appeal to all those with influence over Israel to do everything in their power to help avert even more tragedy. An agreement between the government of Israel and the leadership of Hamas is essential to stop the unbearable suffering of Palestinians in Gaza and of the hostages and their families. It would be tragic if weeks of intense diplomatic activity for peace in Gaza yield no ceasefire, no release of hostages, and a devastating offensive in Rafah.
Now, interestingly enough, shortly before the Rafah operation began, news of Hamas accepting a hostage and ceasefire deal actually began to circulate. In a statement on Monday, Hamas leadership said it accepted proposals put forth by Qatari and Egyptian mediators. Those terms include an end to the war and a days-long exchange of Israeli hostages and Palestinian prisoners. It also included a full Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. The deal was meant to be divided into 3 phases, each one lasting about 42 days. Now, the announcement was met with cheers in Gaza, while Israeli hostage families implored the Israeli government to consider these proposals. But the problem is that Israel already denied this exact sort of deal. In fact, Israeli officials immediately disputed the validity of such a ceasefire, saying it included proposals that Israel had previously shut down in negotiations. The government also tried to accuse Hamas of lying to control media narrative in the war. The announcement from Hamas also appeared to take Americans by surprise, but the State Department said it would still work on a deal between the 2 parties.
It remains our top priority to try to reach a ceasefire agreement that will lead to the release of hostages, that will allow a surge of humanitarian assistance both into Gaza and allow it to move around inside Gaza. But I don't want to comment on any of the various reports about what they might have been responding to until we've been able to go through it in detail.
Israel did say that it would still send a delegation to Cairo to continue indirect talks on the matter, despite this recent deal being what they said was far from their requirements.
Meanwhile, yesterday, Israel observed Holocaust Remembrance Day. The ceremony began in Jerusalem, where sirens blared for 2 minutes, commemorating the atrocity that killed 6 million Jews under Nazi Germany. The solemn event also happened against a backdrop of the more than 100 Jews whom Hamas kidnapped during the October 7 attacks. Meanwhile, in Poland, the commemoration at the Auschwitz concentration camp was overshadowed by pro-Hamas agitators. Dr. Shmuel Rosenman, chairman of the March of the Living, the organization that put on the event, said, quote, "This year, more than ever, we understand why preserving the memory of the Holocaust is still essential. Fighting against a continuous and overwhelming wave of anti-Semitism makes the March of the Living's mission to remember more important and more relevant than ever."
And meanwhile, the U.S. held its own Holocaust remembrance today as politicians and leaders gathered at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial in Washington, D.C. President Biden gave a speech during the event in which he warned of the growing threat of anti-Semitism at home and abroad, comparing the Hamas October 7th attack to the Holocaust itself.
This ancient hatred of Jews didn't begin with the Holocaust. It didn't end with the Holocaust either, or even after our victory in World War II. This hatred continues to lie deep in the hearts of too many people in the world, and requires our continued vigilance and outspokenness. That hatred was brought to life on October 7th in 2023.
Biden also spoke with the goal of trying to satisfy a divided United States over support for Israel. Biden said his commitment to Israel was ironclad, even amid disagreements.
To the Jewish community, I want you to know, I see your fear, your hurt, and your pain. Let me reassure you, as your president, you're not alone. You belong. You always have and you always will. And my commitment to the safety of the Jewish people, the security of Israel, and its right to exist as an independent Jewish state is ironclad, even when we disagree.
Biden also touched on the nationwide college campus protests, condemning the threats and hate speech, but trying to show support for the American right to protest.
We know scapegoating and demonizing any minority is a threat to every minority and the very foundation of our democracy. I understand people have strong beliefs and deep convictions about the world. In America, we respect and protect the fundamental right to free speech, to debate and disagree, to protest peacefully, and make our voices heard. I understand that's America, but there is no place on any campus in America, any place in America, for anti-Semitism or hate speech or threats of violence of any kind.
At the same time, anti-Israel protests in New York spiraled out of control when police stopped a 1,000-strong mob from crashing the Met Gala yesterday. 24 protesters were arrested, but police blockades funneled the Day of Rage into Central Park, where they then vandalized a World War I memorial. Other footage shows confrontations between protesters and other New Yorkers during the chaos. And in related news, leading Jewish law firms are now suing the Palestinian protesters on behalf of Hamas victims. The lawsuit says that death to Jews is terrorism and not protected by free speech. They also claim protesters obeyed the Hamas call for resistance groups on college campuses. That means they are assisting international terrorism and are liable for damages.
And it isn't just college campuses that are in trouble for this anti-Semitic behavior, as some Americans have actually recently outed a couple of companies who are accused of promoting the same thing. Some companies and their CEOs have been more vocal in expressing their opinions on the war in Gaza than others. For example, pharmaceutical provider Hims & Hers CEO Andrew Dudum supported the campus protest last week in a post on X, calling it, quote, moral courage. The company was heavily criticized for that statement and even lost a decent amount of stock value. But the biggest example comes out of pharmaceutical giant Johnson & Johnson. The company's order management tool, which is meant to aid direct consumers and distributors worldwide, listed Palestine as a market in the Middle East, but not Israel. In fact, there was no apparent option for Israel in the Middle East section, and this is according to an investigation from Fox News Digital. J&J was actually challenged on this issue, which the company defended. A spokesperson said the tool is used, quote, for many but not all markets, and is not a list of all markets or regions where the company operates or where products are sold. But pressure on the issue convinced J&J to actually add Israel as an option to that tool, regardless. And when we return, we'll look at news in politics and the economy, as well as a cover-up in international. That and more after this break.
There are moments in life that define us. Choices determine the courses we take. Choices that create life, or those that save a life. And some make life worthwhile. There are decisions to stay or to go, to remain the same or to grow. Sometimes we pray and make peace. Other times we take a stand for what we believe. In celebration, mourning, triumph, and defeat, we are invested in every decision we seek. Despite differences, we have one thing in common, the desire to do all for the glory of God. Keep your wallet aligned with your heart. and your investments in harmony with your faith. Timothy Plan, biblically responsible mutual funds, ETFs, and retirement plans. Before investing, carefully consider a fund's investment objective, risks, charges, and expenses contained in the prospectus available at timothyplan.com. Read carefully before investing.
The miracle of carrying a child creates a unique bond between a mother and her unborn baby. She feels the baby's movements and responds to their needs even before birth. Help create that bond between an abortion-minded mother and her unborn child by giving the gift of life through Preborn. During the month of May, you can bless your mom for Mother's Day by giving to Preborn on your mother's behalf. For $28, you can sponsor an ultrasound scan that will enable an abortion-minded woman to hear the heartbeat of her baby. 90% of the time, that sound will change a woman's mind and cause her to keep their baby. Give the gift of life to the woman that gave you life by sponsoring an ultrasound. Go to preborn.com/FISM to give. That's preborn.com/FISM. You can help an abortion-minded mother receive discipleship, encouragement, and the strength needed to have her baby.
Welcome back to FISM News. I'm Ian Patrick. Before we move now to coverage in politics, let's take one last look at international news. Like I was saying before the break, Russia has apparently detained an American soldier, and this according to U.S. officials. That soldier goes by the name of Staff Sergeant Gordon Black. He's being held after accusations that he stole money from a woman in the nation. The Russian Foreign Ministry says the case is not political, but is just, quote, purely everyday crime. For some background on this case, the 34-year-old was involved in an adulterous relationship that began in South Korea. He traveled by his own choice to Russia to visit his affair partner when his unit thought he was actually traveling back to Texas. Reuters reports that Black and the woman had a falling out and that she later reported him for stealing money. The soldier faces 5 years in prison with at least 2 months of detainment before a trial, and the U.S. State Department reports that he is receiving consular support.
And speaking of the American government, House Speaker Mike Johnson and his challenger, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, finally agreed to a meeting. This comes after weeks of Greene berating the speaker as a sellout and an incompetent leader. However, the two met yesterday alongside Representative Thomas Massie to try and come to an agreement. CNN reports that the talk lasted 2 hours, which Johnson called productive and nothing outside his usual duties.
What it's required when you have the smallest majority in history is that you have to quite literally get everyone to work together. When you can only lose one vote on a party preference or priority, it takes a lot of time to build consensus. So what I do every day, Scott, is almost on an hourly basis, is I hear suggestions and ideas and thoughts from members. My door has been open from day one. Everybody knows that. I mean, I spend endless hours at this.
The meeting comes ahead of a House vote that could oust Johnson, despite most Republicans and Democrats indicating their approval of the speaker.
And now in the unfolding saga of the Robert Hur audio files, Republicans are moving to hold Attorney General Merrick Garland in contempt. The House Judiciary Committee is reportedly planning to vote on this issue on May 16th. And it marks an escalation in a months-long battle for the audio of President Biden's interviews with Special Counsel Robert Hur. So far, the Justice Department has rebuffed all attempts. A DOJ spokesman most recently warned that releasing this audio would actually spook witnesses by signaling that the department cannot protect sensitive information. Only 2 attorneys general have been held in contempt in U.S. history, by the way, that being Eric Holder in 2012 and Bill Barr in 2019. U.S. attorneys, however, declined to prosecute those criminal referrals.
Meanwhile, former President Donald Trump was fined again for violating yet another gag order in his ongoing hush money trial yesterday. Judge Juan Merchant ordered another $1,000 fine for Trump, alongside a warning that threatened the former president with jail time if he violated the gag order in the future. Apparently, the fine came after Trump once again made comments about witnesses and jurors outside of court that were deemed unlawful. This is the second time the former president has reportedly done so. But Trump remains undeterred. Here's what he had to say.
Because this judge has given me a gag order and said you'll go to jail if you violate it. And frankly, you know what? Our Constitution is much more important than jail. It's not even close. I'll do that sacrifice any day. But what's happening here is a disgrace, and the appellate courts ought to get involved.
Merchant replied that while he has no desire to put Trump in jail, at the end of the day, he has a job to do, and that job means upholding the rule of law.
And let's shift now to coverage on the U.S. economy, where a surprising new poll is highlighting just how little Americans seem to trust President Biden in handling economic issues. That information comes from Gallup, which has tracked this data since 2001. According to Gallup, only 38% of Americans have, quote, a great deal or fair amount of confidence in Biden to do or to recommend the right thing for the economy. This marks the lowest amount for a president seeking re-election, as well as one of the lowest measurements overall. By contrast, 46% of U.S. adults say they actually have confidence in Donald Trump when it comes to the economy. Now, divided by party demographics, support for either presidential candidate was largely and unsurprisingly partisan by nature, but a measure of independent voters reflects the overall trend in this poll. 34% trusted President Biden with the economy, while 45% trusted former President Trump. Data also shows that congressional leaders have the lowest marks for this year. Only 36% have confidence in Republican leaders, and 38% have confidence in Democrat leaders. According to Gallup's summary of the data, American assessment of the national economy is, quote, bleak, to say the least.
And still in the economy here, economic growth is giving a lift to Social Security and Medicare, but officials warn the programs will face a funding crisis in a decade. The government's latest projections say that Social Security will deplete its reserve in 2035, while Medicare is slated to run out the following year. That's an increase of 1 in 5 years, respectively, from the last update. Experts say that Congress needs to act now to reform those programs. The issue is a heated debate ahead of the November elections. President Biden responded to the news with another promise to increase taxes on the wealthy to fully fund Medicare. House Republicans instead suggested raising the retirement age or lowering the benefits for high-earning Americans. And we have more national news coming up after this break, but first let's go to Seth Udinsky for a moment in history.
Welcome back to A Moment in History. I'm Seth Udinsky. In this moment in history, let's travel back to the ancient world and explore a dynamic military upset where a fierce band of 300 warriors defeated a far more numerous and more powerful foe. Now, if you're thinking about the Greek battle against the Persians that has become the stuff of movies, good guess, but no. This original 300-strong band of warriors was handpicked by Almighty God himself to show his greatness and power by leading his people, the Israelites, to victory over the massive Midianites behind the leadership of an unlikely captain. The man was Jerub-Baal of Israel, known to us as the Judge Gideon. In this episode, let's explore the dramatic victory of Israel over the Midianites during the Age of the Judges. Now, the theme of this true historical battle is pretty simple. God made his own name great through his often messy, rebellious, and unfaithful people. The battle took place during the Israelite Age of the Judges, somewhere between the 14th and 11th centuries BC, where, like the pre-Noahic age, everyone did what was right in their own eyes. The story is laid out in great detail in the Old Testament book of Judges, chapter 7. So along comes Gideon, hardly a mighty warrior and probably the most unlikely candidate to lead the people of Israel to victory. He was weak in will and lacking in trust in God, as proven by his fleece test, where he asked God to prove himself repeatedly. God, as he always does, proved himself to this timid man, and he did it graciously, by the way. Gideon would become the leader of Israel's army in its battle against the Midianites. The backdrop for God's next display of power was this. The Israelite army numbered roughly 32,000 men, no small number except when compared to the Midianites, which historians have numbered at over 150,000. Then, to rid the Israelites of any shred of self-confidence, God dwindled the numbers down, first to 20,000 and then to 300 through a series of tests, including judging how the soldiers drank water. 300 against 150,000 would give the Israelites absolutely no credit if they somehow won. It would be all of God, and indeed it was. In the dead of night, God commanded Gideon and his 300 men to encircle the Midianite camp. Their weapons were not swords and shields, but pots, torches, and trumpets. God commanded the men to break the pots and blow their horns while chanting, "For the Lord and for Gideon." An unorthodox strategy to be sure, but believe it or not, it worked. When the Israelites made their commotion, God threw the Midianites into chaos and frenzy, where many of them turned on each other and began slaughtering one another. The Israelites won the battle over the Midianites, but folks, listen, we need to understand that the people of Israel literally had nothing to do with this victory. This victory, where 300 men with pots and torches defeated 150,000 fierce warriors, was a miracle. God orchestrated the events in picking a flawed leader and then dwindling said flawed leader's army down to bring glory to his own name, as he so often does. Thanks so much for joining me once again for a moment in history.
Do you want to invest in biblically responsible stocks? Financial Issues can help. For only $132 per year, our team of experts will help you make wise decisions with your money and guide you to successful investments that will not dishonor God. You'll also have access to our Portfolio Tracker tool, which will help you keep an eye on your asset allocations. And our Buys and Sells page, which will give you valuable information about biblically responsible stocks. Being a Financial Issues partner is the best way to invest in accordance with biblical values. Make the most of your money by becoming a partner today. Sign up at financialissues.org. That's financialissues.org.
For $28, you can sponsor an ultrasound scan that will enable an abortion-minded woman to hear the heartbeat of her baby. 90% of the time when this happens, that sound will change a woman's mind and cause her to keep the baby. And guess what? An anonymous donor is matching your gift. For every 200 scans underwritten, an ultrasound machine will be purchased and placed in a life-saving preborn clinic. Go to preborn.com/FISM to give today. That's preborn.com/FISM.
What can you tell our listeners about the benefits of being a partner?
It's blessed me with an opportunity to help further the kingdom in a small way, which matters a lot because God takes small things and makes them big. The blessing really has been to be able to take care of my family, but also take care of the kingdom. Going to bed knowing that not only are you correctly managing your investments, but you're doing it in a God-honoring way.
And welcome back to FISM News. I'm Renata Kiss. Well, let's continue in politics, where Democrats are shifting attention towards security at places of worship. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer announced on Sunday that the government is allocating $400 million to protect places of worship, such as synagogues and mosques, in the wake of the Israel-Hamas conflict. Concerned worshipers could apply for this money to hire security personnel and install cameras in their buildings. Schumer said the funding is for synagogues and other religious institutions so that they wouldn't have to live in fear. Now, this comes as 3 New York synagogues and a Brooklyn museum received bomb threats over the weekend. And in a separate incident on Sunday, a man with a gun showed up at a Christian church wanting to harm the pastor. Fortunately, no one was hurt.
Well, I suppose that government effort is definitely noble in name, but installing cameras in a place of worship seems a little suspicious to me, or at the very least, it could definitely be misused. So we'll see how that goes. And now let's shift slightly into some different political coverage here, focused on the transgender issue specifically. Austin, Texas reportedly voted to become the latest sanctuary city for people wanting transgender procedures, and that does include minors. City council members voted 10-1 on Thursday to approve a resolution in pursuit of this goal. That resolution denies the city from using any sort of resource to investigate or take legal action against transgender or non-binary individuals who are seeking such procedures. It also provides the same protections to individuals and organizations who happen to assist in providing those procedures. And finally, the resolution prevents the city from restricting funding to any group based on their opinions regarding these procedures. Austin Mayor Kirk Watson said in a statement that the city was simply prioritizing, quote, public safety and basic needs, but others criticized the decision, especially as it relates to underage persons. In fact, one person who underwent hormone therapy as a minor told the Post-Millennial that this resolution is nothing more than, quote, regulating experimental medicine on children in a non-criminal way.
Meanwhile, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, or MIT, becomes the first elite private university to end its use of diversity statements for faculty hiring decisions. Remarkably, the abrupt departure from the practice appears to be from internal reform. President Sally Kornbluth handed down the decision with strong support from top administrators. She later told a journalist that compelled statements impinge on freedom of expression, and they don't work. Critics have argued for over a decade now that diversity, equity, and inclusion statements allow universities to illegally screen professors for viewpoint differences. Until now, pushback against the practice has only succeeded at public universities in conservative states. However, this does come a month after a Harvard law professor noted growing academic resentment towards DEI statements at the Ivy League school.
And now let's go to some other national news. Unfortunately, despair continues to hover over prospective home buyers as housing prices are expected to grow. This comes from a new set of data released by the Federal Reserve Bank of New York on Monday. According to its 2024 housing survey, fewer renters are believing that they will ever be able to afford owning a home. In fact, a record low of only 40.1% of renters believe that they will own a home at some point. The broader housing market also seems to be suffering from some negative perception lately. Slightly fewer respondents think purchasing a home in their zip code is a very good or somewhat good investment compared to a year ago, while slightly more see it as a definitively bad investment. The perceived ability to move to another primary residence has also fallen to new series lows. And mortgage rates are similarly bleak in the eyes of the average American. Many expect these rates to continue rising, and even for those whose mortgages have actually dipped below a certain level, they are digging in and trying to keep their properties rather than try and put them on the market.
And that's certainly concerning. But lastly, the U.S. Air Force announced it will launch new AI-operated fighter jets by 2028. The new jet flew over the California desert last week with U.S. Air Force Secretary Frank Kendall on board. Kendall had announced to Congress earlier that he was planning to fly an AI-controlled F-16 while also explaining the future of warfare. According to Fox News, AI-controlled jets are one of the biggest innovations in military technology since the early 1990s. The Air Force leader told AP News that having AI technology is a must at this point, while he also added that pilots will still be on board to mitigate safety concerns. The Air Force plans to produce 1,000 AI-flown planes in the next 4 years. And before we finish today's show, I would like to remind our viewers and listeners to support preborn ministries as they seek to care for abortion-reminded mothers while preaching the gospel. For as little as $28, you can provide an ultrasound scan. To learn more about that, you can go to preborn.com/FISM. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and please visit FISMnews.tv for more content updates, and follow us on social media at FISM News or download the FISM app on your smartphone. Thank you so much. God bless.